Well, since the October 7th terrorist attacks on Israel, we've seen a disturbing rise in anti-Semitism worldwide, and certainly that includes right here throughout the United States. Whether we're talking a Jewish university, a group of students forced to hide from a mob in a college library, or a riot at a high school after students learned that one of their teachers actually attended a rally to support Israel. The bottom line is that the mask has come off for the anti-Semitic views that the left harbors. Well, since we saw just yesterday, in fact, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer delivered a lengthy address on anti-Semitism on the Senate floor, and he noted that those who are attacking Jews, be it verbally or physically, they are people that he previously thought were ideological fellow travelers.
Not long ago, many of us marched together for black and brown lives. We stood against anti-Asian hatred. We protested bigotry against the LGBTQ community. We fought for reproductive justice, out of the recognition that injustice against one oppressed group is injustice against all. But apparently, Mr. President, in the eyes of some, this principle does not extend to the Jewish people.
So that's the big question. What makes support for the Jews different from support of any of the other groups that he mentioned? In the eyes of the left, what is the difference? Well, joining me now to discuss this and more is Dr. Albert Mohler. He's the president, of course, of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, the author of many, many books, including Tell Me the Stories of Jesus, the explosive power of Jesus' parables. Dr. Mohler, always great to have you on Washington Watch. Welcome back.
Well, thank you, Jody. It's always good to be with you. What an important issue for us to talk about.
Man, you are not kidding. So let me just begin it this way. Should Chuck Schumer, should he really at all be surprised that there are some on the left who won't back the Jews?
You know, I don't think he should be surprised. But on the other hand, you can kind of understand the universe of American politics in which you displace the Jewish vote and predominant Jewish leadership. It's been clearly situated in the Democratic Party, most importantly since 1948, when Harry Truman, a Democratic president, recognized Israel. Very important to the history of the Jewish people, and of course the history of Israel. The first nation to recognize Israel was the United States. I think we're very proud of that. You also have a concentration of Jewish population in a lot of the northern urban centers, which are predominantly Democratic. And then you have exactly what Chuck Schumer spoke to there, which is you've had the Jewish culture in the United States very much associated with liberal causes. And, you know, they did march with each other. They you know, his history is right. But there is a deep-seated anti-Semitism that has just arisen to the surface. And you and I know it's not new. But it seems shocking to the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Schumer, who, of course, in his own life is a part of a Jewish community. And, you know, this is a big issue. It's an explosive revelation of a deep anti-Semitism in American culture.
It most certainly is. And here is a perfect segue into where I want to go and want to get your input on this, because this is not, to me, just about anti-Semitism, if you will, against Jewish people. This is a spiritual issue, and it is much deeper than just hatred for Jews. It is a hatred towards God. It is a hatred towards the people of God. And this is not going to end, in my opinion, with anti-Semitic behavior towards the Jews. It is going to go from there to expressions of hostility and hatred to people of faith, period. I mean, we saw this reaction to Mike Johnson as Speaker of the House most recently. Give me your take on this movement that it is a hatred towards God that's going to have broader expressions as this movement continues.
Yeah, you know, Jody, when you look at anti-Semitism, you're looking at one of the world's oldest and certainly its most deadly hatred throughout all of human history. And there's something that is unique in terms of the hatred of the Jewish people. And you see this in the Old Testament. And I think you and I know it is because Israel, as God's elect nation, basically had the antipathy of the rest of the world. This was the scandal of the Jewish people. On the one hand, they were God's elect. On the other hand, the other nations hated Israel. And, we see that in the anti-Semitism that has so characterized human history, even Western civilization. And so it really is a unique hatred of the Jewish people. But you're right. It's not because they were one of the Semitic peoples in the ancient Near East. It's because they were God's elect people in terms of the nation of Israel, as you see in the Old Covenant and the Old Testament. And by extension, yes, this is a hatred of God. And it's particularly ironic since the predominant theological direction of American Judaism has been to the theological left and indeed to secularism. And so, there are a lot of ironies here, but I think it's a deep-seated antipathy to Israel as, and by the way, they claim their identity as the chosen people. Well, that you can see is the enmity of the world in mirror image.
Yeah, good point. So what is your reaction to Democrats who seem surprised, perhaps even disappointed by the anti-Semitism in their own party or on the left, but they never say a word about anti-Christian sentiment?
Yeah, they define it differently, and I don't think that's legitimate, but I'm just saying they define it differently. They defined a Jewish identity largely in ethnicity, which is, of course, the one thing Christians can't do, made up of every tongue and tribe and people and nation. And so if you define it, the Jewish identity in terms of ethnicity, I think you end up with Chuck Schumer's, speech. Yet look at this. I mean, for example, if he had been aware of what was going on the left, and it's hard for me to believe he wasn't, then he would have to know that the cultural Marxism on the left was turning in deep antipathy to the nation of Israel, first of all, deep antipathy to the very existence of Israel. And eventually that means deep antipathy to Israel representing a Jewish nation and thus opposition to Judaism. And so I think there's only a limited extent to which Chuck Schumer, with his eyes open and look at the people he's been hanging around with. Well, guess what? The people you've been hanging around with are deeply involved in a radical left. And guess what? The left consumes itself. It's like I say, the most dangerous person in America right now, or the most vulnerable, is yesterday's liberal, because tomorrow's liberal will chew him up or her up. Just ask, a feminist like Martina Navratilova. The gender revolutionaries want to cancel her.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great point, Dr. Mohler, because just as they are even eating their own, as you just described, it's kind of like the nature of sin. It never is content with where it currently exists. It always is going to take a step further in whatever area we're talking about. Yeah. And this is no different. This is not simply going to be, if it's allowed, if it's not addressed, if it's allowed to run rampant, it will express itself in other areas, as we're already seeing, as you just described.
That's right.
But what do you think about this being a springboard? I wanted to get some clips, and I wasn't able to grab one, of Democrats going after Russ Vought, for instance. Bernie Sanders basically told him in the hearing, you have no right to be involved in politics because of your Christian faith. I mean, is the movement we're currently seeing, in your opinion, going to be a springboard towards more hostility to people of faith in general?
Well, I think that's certainly true. And I think you look at the opposition to the new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, you look at exactly what you talked about, for instance, Russ Vought being interrogated by Bernie Sanders. And by the way, just understand the irony of that, given the fact we're talking about anti-Semitism. But it's a deep antipathy towards any form of theism. And Jody, I think that's a very important issue. Nobody is trying to cancel New Age prophets. No one is going after the neo-pagans of this age. They're going after theists. And, I think there's a very important worldview issue for us to recognize, and that is that the part of Judaism, and I don't mean this just in terms of Jewish ethnicity, but the part of Judaism that's most hated is Torah. It's the law of God. Thou shalt not. God created human beings in his image, male and female, created he them. A secular progressivist left just has to hate that. And they hate any form of theism, because theism comes with thou shalt and thou shalt not. And that's just as true of Christianity as it is of Judaism. And, we can't go along, for instance, with the gender nonsense, the very deadly gender ideology that's been set loose in this country. So you know what? We're now to be canceled. We're now to be basically told we can't believe that or say that anymore. And I saw just this morning, where there are people saying, we've got to forbid these Christian parents from influencing their children along these same lines. So yeah, that's what we're facing.
So is it taking a step too far to say ultimately, as it relates specifically to the Christian community? I mean, we've dealt with the Jewish faith, but also people of faith, specifically Christianity, with those with a theistic worldview. That this group, the left, the radical left, actually want religious freedom for no one. They want to dictate what we believe.
Yeah, I don't think they would say that. I mean, you're certainly right, but I don't think they would say that. I think they're sly enough to say that they're for the toleration and liberty of safe religions and safe religious people. And that means no threat to the left, no threat to its agenda. And so, again, I don't think they really care about going after a New Age preschool. But when it comes to Christianity, when it comes to biblical Christianity, well, that we are the main obstacle to the left delivering on its goals, and they know that. And by the way, the most important thing that goes on here is what goes on in Christian homes and in Christian churches, and then in the third sense in the public square, because the first place we push back is in our own homes, raising our children in the nurtured admonition of the Lord. The second place is in the church, and in the faithful congregation, and then out in the world where we are called to go. And yes, it's going to bring opposition. You can count on it.
Well, that brings up another big question that I hear all the time, and personally have experienced it along the way as well, and that is so many churches that refuse to get into these issues and equip their church family with a biblical worldview and the capacity to stand in the midst of an increasingly hostile environment. It's good to teach someone, for example, what a driver's book says and say, here's how you drive a car. But it's not until you get in the car and actually start driving that you learn how to drive. And the same applies in many ways to practical Christianity. It is one thing to teach biblical principles from the pulpit. It is a different level to teach a biblical worldview and how to live out those biblical truths, particularly in an increasing environment. What do you do when your boss says you must use these pronouns? How do you stand? You, the president of one of the most influential seminaries in the world, what do you say to these pastors who are so slow in engaging their people on these issues?
Well, yeah, they're slow, and I can remember years ago, Irving Kristol, and this just it's a great quote that I think about often. Irving Kristol said that a neoconservative is a liberal mugged by reality. And, we could talk about neoconservatism. That's another issue. But the point is, yeah, you're going to be mugged by reality if you don't understand the responsibility. A lot of Christian pastors who are going to end up saying, what in the world happened? How did this happen? How's this showing up in my church? How is this going uncontested in my community? Well, hey, it's about time you wake up and see the challenge here and understand your responsibility as a pastor, the local church's responsibility as the body of Christ, to speak for these issues. And, you would think that more than a half century after the Roe v. Wade decision, more than a half century after the sexual and moral revolutions of the 1960s and beyond, you would think that that would not be an issue now. And, the other thing I want to say, Jody, is that if I'm talking to a pastor in China, and maybe a pastor of a house church, they don't have a lot of political responsibility because they have no political opportunity. But in the United States, we have a tremendous political stewardship. And that doesn't mean we translate the church's ministry into politics. It does mean we tell Christ's people how to be effective in contending for Christian truth out of love of neighbor. And that means in politics as well.
Well, absolutely. It is impossible to be salt and light without being engaged. And here in America, we have not only the biblical responsibility to do so, but as you say, we are blessed with a country, the entire political system of which does not work without involvement of the people. So what a huge trust that we have. In the last few seconds, tell our viewers and listeners how best we should be praying for our country and our leaders right now.
You know, I think we need to be praying that the American nation will continue to stand for righteousness around the world. And I pray that the American people and the American government will continue to stand with the nation of Israel. It's not a perfect nation, because we understand as Christians there is no perfect nation. But it is the sole democratic constitutional government in the entire Middle East. And I think we as Christians understand it's more than that.